So I'll go back to that original quote before we close. And then I have one more. I like this. I just want to remind all of us holding on to anger, or in this case, unforgiveness, is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I read that. I said, well, shoot.
I know you're just drinking the poison.
Right.
And they're just sitting there looking at
I
you.
want you to die.
Right, and they're just sitting there watching
They're
you
watching
drink
you
the poison.
die. She's drinking poison.
I am unaffected
not
by
right.
drinking that poison.
That is not my intention. Welcome to Get Real with Alexis Jones. On this podcast, we'll dive into real relationships with real people guided by the wisdom and perspective of some of the most seasoned voices in our community, our beloved seniors. Each week, we'll unpack the joys, challenges, and lessons learned about love, family, friendship, and everything in between. This is a space for heartfelt conversations, eye-opening truths, and powerful stories that will inspire and challenge the way you think about relationships. We're keeping it honest, unfiltered, and deeply meaningful. So settle in and let's get ready to get real. Let's jump in. Well, welcome to another episode of Get Real with Alexis. I am so excited to have my friend, Dr. Kim Redding, with me again so that we can have a really substantive discussion. And Kim, if you tuned in to our episode several weeks ago, you know that Kim is a medical doctor and she's on staff at Morehouse School of Medicine. And so I get to call her Kim. And so I'm so happy to have you here tonight again.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, so let's get to it. So tonight, it is nighttime here. We could have worn our pajamas again, but we didn't. We thought we'd get all dressed up for you.
That's right.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the F word. We're going to drop the F-bomb, but not the F-bomb that everybody thinks of. We're going to talk about forgiveness tonight. It's one of those topics that is really controversial. The whole idea of forgiveness is difficult to forgive and forget. I was thinking about tackling 3 areas: forgiving others, asking for forgiveness, and then more importantly, or just as important, forgiving ourselves. So let me share some things from my notes, and then let's just talk about our personal experience with forgiveness. Just a few things. Forgiving others, why it matters. So psychologists say forgiveness is more for the forgiver than the offender because it releases bitterness, stress, and resentment. It helps prevent anxiety, depression, and even physical health problems. You know, Kim, as I was reading that, because we've heard this, forgiveness is really not for the other person, it's for you. What was your reaction the first time you heard that?
I didn't believe that. I didn't embrace that because I felt like that I forgive if I feel like somebody has earned my forgiveness. And so if I don't feel that someone has really earned my forgiveness, then it's hard for me to forgive. And I don't know, I couldn't wrap my mind around how my forgiving them benefits me. Yeah. Because I know how I'm feeling. Yeah. I mean, I'm feeling hurt or angry. And how does my forgiving them without them having taken any ownership of what they did in order to cause that hurt or pain? How does my forgiving them make me feel better? Right. When what I want from them is ownership of what they did and some acknowledgement of it, you know, and some apology for it. So
sincere apology.
Right. And so that didn't make sense to me. It's like, what do you mean it's for me? You know, so
I feel the same way that when I first heard that concept that forgiveness is for you, not for the other person. I was kind of resentful, like, what are you talking about? This person has wronged me and they need to make amends some kind of way. And I forgive them if I choose to. But the onus is on them. So we'll get into that whole idea that forgiveness is for us, not the offender. The second thing I want to mention is that spiritually speaking, spiritual teachers will remind us that forgiveness is an act of grace. That's another thing you'll hear. Not because the other person deserves this, going back to what you said earlier, but because we deserve peace. It says that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That's pretty powerful, isn't it?
That's very powerful.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like from a spiritual perspective to turn the other cheek. And that to me has always been a difficult concept.
Sure.
Because it's like, if you slap me, I'm not going to turn the other cheek so you can slap me again. I think that whole concept, sometimes I wonder, is it asking more of me than I'm capable of, or have I not ascended to that level yet where I can do that? Because if I feel hurt or angry, or if I feel like I've been wronged, it is still very hard for me to let go of that.
I remember years ago, I think I was still living in Cleveland, or either I had just moved to Atlanta. This was so hurtful that I can almost remember the time and the place. So this person had hurt me deeply, and the whole idea of forgiveness was just out of the question. It just was. I was too hurt and I was too angry, but I was trying to do what I believed, what I was taught the Bible said we should do, what Jesus wants us to do, and what he did. So all of that, I was in conflict with what I was feeling and what I believed was the right thing to do. It was a battle going on inside of me. It really was, because I thought that, first of all, I had every right not to forgive you if you didn't ask for forgiveness. I felt like I had every right. I felt like I had every right not to forgive you if you weren't sincere. I don't have to forgive you. Any of that. You had to ask, and you had to be sincere with your ask. And then maybe.
Right. And then
maybe. But I felt like I had every right. And then the whole notion of forgive and forget. There's a scripture in the Bible about when Jesus forgives us, it's like throwing our sins into the sea of forgetfulness. He removes it as far as the east is from the west. And he expects us to do that.
I think, I hear that, but it's like, I think we're human and that's really hard to do. Now, I think, again, if someone has for forgiveness, or if someone seems sincere, or if someone has taken accountability and kind of acknowledged my feelings and what that did to me and how that made me feel, and if they're sincere, can truly forgive. I can truly forgive. And I don't know if I can say, oh, I forget, like, I don't remember that happened, but I can think about it and not feel the anger or the hurt anymore. So to me, the forgetting is not, because I can't wipe that out of my mind. I remember that happened, but to me, the forgetting is not being angry about, or that not causing negative emotions or feelings in me anymore. And so I can think about situations with people that I care for dearly that have hurt me, but we've talked about it and they've accepted ownership of it, and we've been able to get past that. And it's not that I forget, but I don't hold it against them. So to me, that's what I'm able to do in terms of forgetting. That's the forgetting part for me.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I came to understand that forgiving is not forgetting. In other words, I don't think about it in my mind or I can't remember it, but the sting is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I can sit here with you and we can talk and laugh about other matters because I forgive, but I know what you did. In fact, you know what I think? I think that forgiveness is remembering and not holding that against the other person.
Yeah.
I think that's an even bigger ask to remember. I remember exactly what you did, and I remember how hurt or how angry I was and in that moment. But I'm not holding that against you anymore. So I can see you and not think about the person who did such and such. Or I can get a phone call or a text. But until that happens, I have these feelings that I may not express to you, but they are there because I'm still hurting by what you did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard for me to be able to get to that point of the forgetting if you haven't owned what you. So that's the part that I think I struggle with is
Yeah.
saying that it's for me and not for the person who hurt me, but for me to forgive because that makes me feel better. But I find it hard. I find it so hard to do that if I feel like you haven't really taken accountability for what you did or acknowledged that hurt me, and I can accept that maybe that wasn't your intention, but you have to at least acknowledge how I felt, because the other thing is like somebody says, well, I'm sorry if that hurt your feelings, almost like, well, it's not really my fault. That is still on you.
Right.
It's your fault if that hurt your feelings.
Your feelings got hurt.
Right, that your feelings. Right, right. To me, that's like not a real apology. It's just almost a dismissal.
The whole if.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
A dismissal of how that made me feel. A struggle. It is so hard for me to just say, because I think it's important, to even say, my intention was not to hurt you, and acknowledging that it hurt you, and then acknowledging how that must have made you feel. I find it hard to understand how you can get to a true point of forgiveness and being able to move past that if you don't have those real conversations about what that did. And I guess that's where I struggle with this.
Of course.
Of course. Forgiveness.
And that's honest. And I think if we look at it spiritually speaking, the example that we have is what Jesus did. So he was on the cross after all he had endured, even before getting to the cross. And all these people who had hurt him, abused him, beat him, and tortured him, nobody said, I'm sorry. Nobody said, I'm sorry, as he hung there and he died for us. So there's two things happening here. And I explain this because I think for me, that was where, according to the Bible, I'm asked to get to. I'm asked to get to that. And like you said, humanly speaking, it's like, oh my goodness, that's a big ask. But what Jesus did was he hung there without hatred or malice or unforgiveness because he had a bigger purpose. He had a bigger purpose. And maybe, and I'm just thinking about that as we're talking about this, Kim, maybe that's the key, is to realize that we have a bigger purpose. I have a bigger purpose than to hold that what you did against you. I have a bigger purpose. I have, as we say, I have bigger fish to fry. I have more important things to do. I mean, life is just too big. I have too much I want to accomplish, too much I want to do, too many people I want to love, too many people who love me to focus on you. So maybe that's where the unforgiveness hurts me than the person who hurt me, because I can't think about much else when I'm in that kind of pain because I'm holding on to this unforgiveness. So that's one way of looking at it, is kind of putting it in perspective a little bit. But going back to the big ask, I think that we strive, we just try to make gains. I mean, we can't be like Christ all of a sudden.
Right.
It's a journey. But here's the thing. This is a funny thing. If you ask Because I had to start asking God, okay, I'm angry and I don't see forgiveness in me anywhere when it comes to that person and what they did. So if it's your will, if that's what you want me to do, you're gonna have to help me. You're gonna have to touch my heart, touch my mind, and help me do it because I cannot do that. Right. And so I remember praying the prayer just like that and speaking it just like that. And then over time, it was like my perspective changed and something shifted. I can't tell you when or how, but I was able to just let it go. And over the years, I'm not saying it's easy, but over the years, I've gotten to the place where I don't look for remorse from somebody. If I get it, that's just icing on the cake. But I don't look for true remorse. I just don't look for it because if I do, I stay hurt.
So what about, because I think that's powerful, to say, that because I've never thought of it like asking God to help me through this forgiveness journey. And I can't say that I've actively asked God to help me because I've just kind of stood on my own and it's like, this is how I feel and this is what I expect from this person. So I think that is a different perspective. But I guess I would ask too, when you said you went through this process and it was over time and then you were eventually able to get there. But what about people that are in situations where they are still in contact with that person, like whether it's, a relationship, a family member, but somebody that you have to continue to be in contact with and they continue to hurt you. So, or continue to not acknowledge, their role in anything. So it's one thing if it's somebody you've done something, and I can, right, and they're gone, or I have a say in whether or not I decide, to right. But in some situations, there are people in your life that continue to hurt you and not take accountability for the pain that they have caused or causing you. And then you still have to continue to be in some sort of relationship with them, whatever that relationship is.
So for me, this is what I can only tell you what my transition or my evolving in this area, because it is harder when it's people who are close to you in your inner circle or people that you're going to come in contact with or family members, all of that. I've learned to be comfortable with confrontation. Most people avoid it, me included, over the years. But once I say to you, Kim, you did XYZ, and that really hurt me. It really hurt me when you said such and such and such. And you might say to me, well, you should have, it's like, this is the example I use. Kim, you stepped on my feet and it really hurt. And you say, well, your feet were in the way.
Your feet should have been there.
Your big feet were in the way. This is a walkway. You should have had and that's, in essence, that's what people do.
Right.
But once I say what's bothering me, once I say to you, I was hurt when you stepped on my feet, you can acknowledge it. You can say you're sorry. You can be remorseful, or you can not care if that's what you want to do. But I've unloaded. I have found that works for me. I have to unload. Now, I had to learn to unload because I really have a sharp tongue. I don't have to say it delicately. I can just say it. But over the years and years and years, I've learned to say, you did this and it hurt me. It hurt me when you said, it disappointed me when you did this, or I'm scared when you do this. And then I'm not expecting you to respond the way I would love you to. I'm not, because that's what keeps me held hostage. But I release it by confrontation. But I've learned, or I'm learning, how to confront. Like, I don't say, you stepped on my toe. Because most of the time, if you say that like that, people get defensive and nothing gets resolved. But if I say, I was hurt when you stepped on my toe, or your stepping on my toe hurt me, and then I'm putting it on myself. I'm hurt. I'm hurt by the way you spoke to me. Instead of, I don't like the way you spoke to me. Or you spoke to me and you said, or you did, or you said, or you pointed. And when you do that, people automatically,
Right,
they're
become
ready to fight.
defensive.
Yeah, they're defensive. So, I try to say it in that way, but the bottom line is, when I confront, when I feel like I need to, I don't always need to. Sometimes I can let it go. But if I can't let it go without saying something, I think about how I want to say it. I try to find a good time. I'll even ask the person, can we talk? Is this a good time? Because I really need, I need to say it. But once I do that, it seems to release for me. I think there seems to be a release for me, because a lot of times, I would say most of the times, you don't get the response that you would like. Most people don't want to take ownership.
Yeah. I think that's important, because I think, again, for me, and I think I have gotten better at confronting and saying how I feel, because I think that for a lot of my life, my concern was for other people, not wanting to cause tension and all that. And so I think that I probably was uncomfortable with confronting people, because I didn't want people to be angry. And I think that over time took a toll on me. And so I really had to start learning how to become more comfortable with that. But then out of that too, it's like you said, kind of, I think I'm still evolving to that point where I don't need that other person to respond the way I want them. And for me, that is I'm still learning that, because I feel like I try really hard to take ownership, or I try really hard to be objective, or to think about, how that may have hurt someone, because I think I've always been very sensitive to other people. And so I guess for me, I want that same consideration. And so when I don't get it, then that becomes really hard for me, to deal with, or to forgive, or to move on, if I feel like I haven't gotten the same consideration that I try and give other people. So it's a journey.
It's a journey. And what you're describing is me exactly the way that I was years ago. What I'm sharing with you has been long, tedious, and painful, and to get to the place, and I don't always hit the mark 100%, but I'm way better. And I think the biggest thing is, as we were discussing, not expecting, because people have a hard time being honest about what they did, or taking ownership of what they've done, even if you tell them. And so that was, it really was. We were reading here about, let's see, what does it say? Psychologists say that forgiveness is more for the forgiver, because it releases bitterness, stress, and resentment. I was filled with bitterness and stress and resentment and depression and anxiety, because I was holding this pain inside that somebody else caused. I'm not telling you, I'm not able to tell you that I'm hurting, and I'm not able to forgive you for that. And it was just destroying me.
So how did you work through that? What did you do?
Slowly. And the first thing was, as I said earlier, I prayed. And I said, I actually told God, I know I need to forgive him, but I don't see how I can do it. I don't even want to. I don't even want to. I just don't. I am hurt. I am angry. I could use the word hate easily right now in this moment. So if this is where you want me to be, you'll have to help me. You'll have to touch my heart. You'll have to touch my mind. And I found that it was frank. It was a very frank prayer, because I talked to God like I'm talking to you. But I found that because I meant it, it was little, it was just small things over the years that I was able to let go of. Just really small things, centimeters at a time, until I was able to just, so I still hurt. I still hurt. I still hurt deeply, but it's not as difficult to let it go.
And you can really feel the difference in you.
I can feel the difference in me because it's really not about the other person. Oh, I wish they would say, Alexis, this cousin, friend, whatever I am to them, I wish they would say, I did this and I know it hurt you deeply. I'm so sorry. I rarely get that. I get it sometimes, but it's not common. But I can't wait for that because what I realized is that holding it against them was destroying me emotionally, spiritually, physically, even, because all that stuff, as you know, it takes a toll. Stress takes a toll on you, on your health. And so even now when I find myself holding on to it, I'll sit in it a while and say, God, it really hurt me. But I gotta let it go. I gotta let it go. And let people just be, and just keep trying to walk this journey the best that I can.
I think what you said that really struck me is you described all these emotions that this caused: anger, depression, stress, anxiety. And so it's interesting because, you and I have talked about where I am in my life, and this is kind of a new space for me to be, recently divorced after many years. And so sometimes I think it's hard to sort out the root of all of these feelings, So I think there is some anger, there is some kind of sadness, and just trying to kind of work through the root of that, and wondering, is some of it because I'm holding on to these feelings, and if I were able to let go, then, because it's almost like I want to be at that place of just complete peace,
of course,
and contentment, and I know that, I'm in the right place, but it's like now I need almost to let my feelings kind of catch up with where I am, and kind of, so I wonder, because I do, like I said, I still want people to take ownership, to acknowledge, to even acknowledge everything that I did and contributed. But like you said, that may never happen. And so I'm gonna have to be okay with that in order to just be able to continue on my journey
and to have the peace that you just mentioned.
Right.
Because really that's the result. That's the main result to me of learning to let go, whether they deserve it or not, whether they ask for it or not. I want the gift of peace.
Yeah.
I want that peace. And so through my own experience with hurt and forgiveness and unforgiveness, I learned that I can't have it. I can't have it if I hold on to what you did to me. So, and sometimes, like I said, it's just not easy to let go. And I'll repeat this. It helped me to unload when I was able to tell you, whether that was in writing or person to person or whatever I needed to do. I needed to let you know that really hurt me.
And I think the piece of that I have to work on for myself is because I think I've gotten better at telling you and letting you know. But where I still am is when I do that, I still have that expectation of you're going to acknowledge how I felt, or you're going to take ownership. Right. And that's the part that it ain't happened yet.
And that may never happen.
Right.
And that is really the part where you have to not expect.
Right. And that's when you were saying that you're able to say how you made me feel and what that did to me without the expectation that you're going to accept, acknowledge, apologize, not And I think that's what I still have to work on. I have to get there where just me saying, because me saying it is a step for me. It's a big step. Right. But now, like I said, I have the expectation that now that I've said it and I've told you, you're going to care, or you're going to care. You're going to care. Oh. Right.
I tell myself, if they acknowledge and are remorseful about what they did and just really sorry and care enough about me that you hurt me and you didn't want to hurt me, I mean, I want all of that, but I tell myself, if I get that, that's just icing on the cake, but don't expect that.
Yeah.
Don't expect us. Most people will not own completely. Some people won't own it all. Some people own a piece of it. I was telling you, I think I told you, I met a lady in the elevator once, and she's really a sweet person. She lives in our building, and this wasn't too long after Herman passed away. She said something to me, and I can't remember exactly what she said. And I said, well, I did just lose my son. I said it just like that. And she said, and she was texting. So this is how I went, well, you have another son. Yeah, no. She said, well, you have another daughter, don't you? It's like 2 cans of soup. Don't you have another can of soup? Exactly. And I was like, I was stunned. I was hurt. I was angry. I was sad. All of these emotions just flooded me in that one little moment. I was frozen. And I walked off the elevator, and I don't even remember the journey from the elevator to my bedroom where I sat in that chair like, what just happened? But I texted her, and I waited a few minutes. I really felt like most people, in terms of grief, and and maybe in life as well, they don't realize what they say and what they do and how it might hurt you. Not everybody, I'm just saying. But anyway, in this particular case, I texted her back and I said, you said, and I repeated what she said to me. And I said, I just want you to know that really hurt me. I said, if I had 10 children, my pain wouldn't be any less intense. And her first response was, what I said was misconstrued. I didn't like that. You see, that's not really taking ownership.
Exactly.
But then she said, I'm really not good at this sort of thing. And I told her, I understand. A lot of people aren't good. I said, when you see me, you don't have to ask about it. You can just say, hi, Alexis. But my point is, I needed to let her know that hurt me. I really didn't know how she was going to respond, and I honestly didn't care. I didn't care, but I needed to let her know that that wasn't okay. And you know what I think, as we dig a little deeper or peel back the onions a little bit more, I think that we have to begin to believe that we're worth it. As we dig to the core of this matter, because I'll let you say and do anything to me and just be hurt and angry and depressed and sad and all of that and not say anything if I don't really value myself. But I value myself. I don't deserve to be treated that way. Or if you hurt me, and you need to know you hurt me, you might not acknowledge it, but I'm worth being treated well, right? And so I think in a lot of cases we don't realize our own worth. And like you were sharing with me, you're not responsible for making everything okay.
Right.
Some of us think we're responsible for making everything and everybody okay.
At our own expense.
At your own
expense. And I think your point, realizing that we're worth it, I think that's at the core of a lot of things that we don't address or that we allow other people to do to us, because we on some level feel that everyone else is more important than we are. Mm-hmm. Everyone else's feelings, mm-hmm. everyone else's peace, mm-hmm. everyone else's happiness is more important than my happiness. And I think some of that stems from, I don't want to generalize, but I think sometimes as women, as mothers, as daughters, as caregivers, we learn to put other people first, to kind of sacrifice ourselves. And it's almost that martyrdom, that makes us a better person because we're willing to sacrifice ourselves for other people.
Absolutely.
It's almost like, well, our reward will come later. I just will sacrifice and do myself, and we do that a lot as women. That's what we're raised to do, work ourselves to the bone to ensure everyone else is okay. And so I think that's all part of that too, is that we're not comfortable in a position where we're putting ourselves first, or somehow that's self-centered or selfish, And I just remember, this saying, I don't know where I saw it, but like, self-care is not selfish.
Absolutely.
And so I think we think that if we're putting ourselves first, then somehow. So I think that plays into that too, that not being comfortable speaking up for yourself, not being comfortable telling someone that they've hurt you or how they've made you feel.
Because you don't feel like you have a right.
Right.
Well, so I can't say anything. I think
I just have to accept it.
We just have to accept. Yeah. But I think as we evolve, as we begin, this gets into the area of forgiving. We were talking about forgiving others, and my third area was forgiving ourselves. But that includes loving ourselves.
Yes.
We're missing that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I don't love others, because I really believe that I can't really love others if I don't love myself.
Exactly.
I just don't know how. I just don't know how. If I can't value me, how can I value someone else? If I don't love me, because I think that old saying is true, that hurting people hurt other people. Mm-hmm. Right. So if I'm just filled with hurt and unforgiveness for myself, or I don't value myself, how can I be any different towards anybody else? And I think that this whole idea of forgiving others evolves as I evolve as a person. So it became something more than, okay, I need to do this. I know it's the right thing to do. I need to do this. The Bible said I need to do it. And I prayed about it. They taught me in Sunday school I need to do it. I got to forget, da, 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 da. Yes, all of that. But as I evolved, just as a person, as a woman, as I learned to forgive myself, to value myself, then forgiving you became a little easier, because I didn't have to hold on to that. As I'm more worthy of, if I have more worth, as I develop more worth, I did not have to. I chose. It was a choice. It became a choice. Whereas before it's like, they did. I will never forget it. Look what you did. Right. 20 years later, you did such and such. But as I evolved as a person, still evolving, it became a choice. I choose. I can hold it against you if I want to, but I choose not to, because I really want peace. And I want a life that's not filled with a heart of bitterness and resentment and anger and all of that. So it's a choice now, whereas before it wasn't.
I think what you said is really interesting, and it just is kind of resonating with me, because how you said, when we look at, when we talk about God and Christ and the Bible and what the Bible and Jesus calls us to do. And so sometimes I think, we say we forgive because we know we're supposed to. But I think there's a difference between just saying I forgive you and truly forgiving. And I think that true forgiveness comes from that evolution as an individual, as a person, that you grow into that. Because I think that there's some situations where you say you forgive because that's what I'm supposed to do, but you haven't really forgiven. Right. And that's the kind that still kind of, gets at you, and that you still kind of, it still causes those emotions in you. And so I think there's a difference. And I think we can say, oh yeah, I forgive you, but you really haven't, and so. And
you see that in church all the time, because we're going to do what it says, but they're just words.
Right. They're just words. Yeah. And I think that really, that growth and that evolution and that true forgiveness, we continue to work at that.
Well, so what we do is, because there's a scripture that says, "Let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus." So what I discovered was, cannot do this without having the mind of Christ. How do I get that? I ask Him, and then I just slowly try to do the things in little tiny pieces that He did, just little things until they become a little bit bigger. But I have to have a changed mind, which leads to a changed heart. And as you said a moment ago, as you evolve, you and love yourself and then love others. Because when I love others, I care whether I hurt them or not.
Right.
And they don't have to ask me, they don't have to really tell. It's very seldom, if ever, somebody has to say, "Alexis, you hurt me." That might happen sometimes, but I know I've hurt you. I can pretend like I didn't, or I can justify it, like your feet were way, that's what. Or, I'll give you an example. I don't know if I told you this. I told it to somebody. So, I teach line dance. So sometimes we have these performances, right? Now, people come to my class. I have a lot of people in my class. They come on Monday morning. And I tell them, if you're coming to class and all you want to do is dance and go home and forget about it, have at it. This is your class. Make it your own. Enjoy it the way you want to enjoy it. But if you want to go to these other venues and perform, you got to learn to dance. The standards got a little bit higher, right?
Right.
And when I'm teaching them these dances for performance, I'm like, okay, let's do it again. What are y'all doing? So they call me a drill sergeant. But anyway, but they laugh. They know it's in love. But anyway, I can get pretty intense. I really can. Because, if you don't know to dance, you need to say, "I'm going to sit this one out." Because I really wasn't able to practice. I'm good with that.
Right.
Because, people have other things going on in their lives, right? So, one of the ladies, she wasn't able to practice, and she, I think, was planning on performing. And when we were having, I think, the last practice, I don't remember what I said to her, or how I said it, but I know it offended her. And I love her. She was in my class from the very beginning. I've been at this location 2 years. And so I could have said, well, she knows she can't. What did she expect? She should have been, or she should have known, or
Was she indicating that she was going to perform or something?
She indicated to me she was going to perform.
Okay.
So, but I left there feeling like it didn't matter what she may or may not have done wrong. I hurt her. I offended her. That was the bottom line. It doesn't matter what the exchange was, or why, or who was right, or who was wrong. I offended her. And I had to own that within myself. And so I couldn't reach her by phone a couple of times. And so I saw her at the center. She'll probably see this video, or somebody will tell her. But anyway, I hope she doesn't mind me telling the story. She's really a sweet person, but she was offended. And I knew she was offended because two of the women that she's close to told me immediately. And I knew it because in my heart, I knew she was offended. I could see it in her face. I saw it in her face. So I could have dismissed it because, well, I told everybody that if you're going to perform, you got to do that. So, I'm totally in the right here.
Right.
But I looked in her face and I had offended. So I finally saw her one day and I asked her if I could talk with her. So we went over in the quiet corner at the center and I looked her in the face and I said this to you, or I said this in a way to you that was offensive. And I am so sorry. I had no right to do that. And she was so gracious, exception to the rule. You remember how we were saying? She said, "Oh, you don't need to apologize. I just got a lot on me." And I said, "It may or may not be. I was wrong. And I should never have spoken to you that way." And I asked her to forgive me. And so now when I see her, we just speak and we hug and all of that. The air is clear.
So do you think if you hadn't done that would have impacted your relationship with her?
Yes. I think I would have lost that friendship. That person that was there with me from the beginning, of the person who seemed to admire me and enjoyed my class, I would have lost her. she would have been cordial, but there would have been that paper thin thing
Right.
between us.
That divide, something that divided or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
And I did not. So forgiveness is about restoration if you can do it.
That's true.
It takes two to restore. But even if she had said, well, you shouldn't have said what you said and I'm never coming here, I would have had to accept that.
Right.
I would have had to accept that. And I would have had to forgive myself for what I did or how I spoke to her. But she was one of those exceptions that embraced, she hugged me, and then when I see her now, she puts a big smile on her face. Hey, Alexis, so it feels so. It's one of those occasions where you do get that icing on the cake that you so want. But I don't always get that. Yeah. But my point is that, well, I could have said, well, Jane Doe, if I offended you, I'm sorry. If I know I offended her,
right,
I could see it in her eyes.
Right. Yeah.
If I said something and I'm sorry, and then you think you're off the hook, you're not off the hook.
But I think that kind of speaks to because you were the one that you were the offender.
Yes.
And you took a moment to reflect and you accepted ownership for that. And then you did something about it, And so again, yeah, she could have responded in a number of ways, but I think that speaks to if more people did that, it's, I think that's what it took.
Yeah.
I think the way you apologize, because I think if you had been, well, if I offended you, it's even the way you approach it, that you don't know, that may have caused a different response from her. But the way you went about it, I think in such a thoughtful way and such a reflective way and, owning what you did, I think that made all the difference in the restoration of that relationship. And so I think if people would kind of think about that.
But we don't have any control over other people.
Exactly.
So all we can do is what we need to do in those relationships and not expect.
Right. So in that situation, she could have come to you and said, Alexis, what you said, really hurt me and whatever. And then, that would have been her role in that. But it seems to me like she probably would not have said anything to you if you hadn't.
I don't know, but I'm guessing she would not. She would have just carried that offense. She would have carried that hurt that I caused. And I had no right to do that.
Yeah. And maybe because too, sometimes I think, I don't know her at all. But then you said, somebody like you're the instructor in the class, you're somebody she's kind of admired and looked up to. And so I think sometimes those, I don't want to call them power dynamics, but those differences in how someone perceives you or who you are make a difference in how comfortable they would feel kind of approaching you and saying that this is how you made me feel.
Because it's risky. So even though I don't know if what her thoughts were, but it's risky when we approach someone to confront them, to tell them how they hurt us. It's risky, as we've been talking about. We don't know how they're. Exactly. Oh, they might just cut us to pieces. They might just make it worse.
Yes.
Well, who do you think you are? I mean, coming to me. It's your fault. You had your feet out there.
Right.
That's why I stepped on them.
Exactly.
I mean, it's risky.
It is.
So when you go into it, you have to know this is risky. But what do you need to do for yourself? What do I need to do so that I can have peace? And the rest is on you. The rest is on you. So let's see what else we wanted to say about this whole idea of forgiveness.
And it's so interesting too when you talk about kind of loving ourselves and forgiving ourselves, because it was just really interesting. So, my daughter, so I was talking to her on my way home today. And so I said, I'm going to...
She's a doctor too, by the way. Just had to say that.
Yes, she is. So I was telling her that and so She said, "Oh, you like doing those podcasts?" I said, "Yeah, I do." And so I said, "Our topic today is forgiveness." And so she said, "Oh, that's interesting." And so I said, "Yeah." I said, "I have to really reflect on that." I said, "Because sometimes I think I have a really hard time forgiving." And so my daughter said, "No, you don't. That you are one of the most forgiving people that I know." She said, "In fact, you forgive people that I don't think deserve forgiveness sometimes." She said, so she said, "I think you're a very forgiving people." She said, "And I think sometimes you're harder on yourself than other people are, thinking that you should be this particular way all the time." And I just said, "That's really interesting." And I said, "I'm going to share that during the podcast." But I just say that too. And sometimes we're harder on ourselves too. And we expect so much from ourselves, you know. And when we're thinking about, forgiveness and, all of this, I think we have to accept, our humanness and not expect perfection and understand that it is a journey. And like with any journey, there will be ups and downs, there's something setbacks, and that, you have to give yourself some grace sometimes.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. That is probably the most important piece of this discussion, is that it is a journey and we're going to fail. We'll make progress and then we'll have setbacks, or we'll do it right this time and think we got it mastered, and then another situation and we'll blow it completely. But because it's just a journey.
Yeah.
Just got to keep trying.
Just got to keep trying.
We got to keep trying, to keep asking for divine intervention, keep asking for a heart that forgives even when we don't want to. But I think we need to give ourselves some grace.
Yeah.
Because we're not good at that.
Yeah.
We're not typically good at that. Yeah. I think that's part of that gift of peace. When I learned to give myself grace for my mess ups, and to know that I'm not going to get it perfectly, and I'm going to fall down and ask for the grace to get back up again and keep trying.
Right.
So I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah.
I'm glad Erica shared that with you. Yeah. So I'll go back to that original quote before we close. And then I have one more. I like this. I just want to remind all of us, holding on to anger, or in this case, unforgiveness, is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I read that. I said, shoot.
I know you're just drinking the poison.
Right.
And just sitting there looking at
I
you.
want you to die.
Right. And they're just sitting there watching
They're
you
watching
drink
you
the poison. I am unaffected by drinking that poison.
That is not my intention. And then this last one is by Lewis Smedes. It says, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner was you.
That's nice.
That was a good one, too.
That's a good one. Yeah. We have to keep working.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this discussion, and thank you for your authenticity as always.
I love talking to you.
I know. We have the best talks.
We have the best.
We should just push record.
I know.
Still learning.
Yeah.
I'm on a steep learning curve, but
well, thank you for inviting me. Also, congratulations to you in person, face to face. But this is the first one. Yes, this is the first one we've done in the same room and talking.
I like this better.
I do. And so congratulations to you, because I know how hard you've been working to put all this together. And this was a really wonderful experience. I enjoyed it so much. So congratulations.
And I have to give a shout out to my son, Brandon. Really spent hours and hours helping me put my studio together. And he designed my sign.
Which is beautiful.
And told me how to get the lighting and set up. So anyway, thank you. And thanks to our audience. Thank you for joining us again. And don't forget to like and subscribe, comment. We love your comments. And share. We need you to share. And then we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.